Hey guys, JWar here with another video. Today we're going to talk about choosing a build, path of building, and what you should be looking at in path of building when you're deciding a build. We're also going to talk about cost to value ratio when upgrading items and how to go about upgrading your build as effectively as possible. So alright, let's get into it. Alright guys, so we're going to look at a build here in Path of Building. If you're not familiar with Path of Building, there's plenty of videos on how to set up Path of Building and how to pull up your account in Path of Building. You just need your account name and you need your account to not be set to private. You can look up how to do this. I'm not going to go into depth in this video for the sake of time. But okay, so we have a build here. It's around level 80. This build, so pretty fresh into maps. We're looking at low tier maps here. We're only at 700,000 DPS, but go over the gear real quick. This is just a two-hander. You should be able to make it very easily or even find in the axe. 450 physical DPS two-hander. And then we just have some gear with life and res. Some of the gear here, like these rings, I was kind of using this to see more what endgame gear would look like. These have quite a lot of res and some nice life rolls. We don't need that, but that's what's in here for now. But it's nothing but life and res on all the gear, right? So nothing crazy, nothing really scaling up our damage in a way you wouldn't have access to early in the league. I've taken off the Taste of Hate here. We have an interrogation in, but we are not using brittle yet or any of the other ailments, so we're not taking advantage of that. We're going to look at that as a possible upgrade because we're also going to talk about the value to cost ratio. So on Path of Building, if you're not familiar with it, this is the configuration tab here. You have your skills tab here with all your gem links. It's going to tell you what socket they're in. You tell it what links you have or what gems you're using. And if you include them in a group like this, it assumes they are linked to each other, such as we have a 6th link here with Glacial Hammer is the build we're making. And I wouldn't recommend this build. I haven't tried it out myself yet, but we're just looking at maybe another melee skill in case Lightning Strike is nerfed in the next patch. I was just going to try it out. And it seems to be pretty good on paper. So I'll show you guys. We'll go into things we're looking at in this build. And the first thing I want to go over is what a build should have. If you're looking at a build in Path of Building and you think about playing it, we should look at what a build should have in PoB, right? What does it look like on paper? Every build, and by the way, every build should have a Path of Building if you're looking at a YouTube video. YouTube videos are probably one of the most popular ways to find builds. If you're looking at a build on YouTube, if it doesn't have a Path of Building, don't play that build. Because there's a couple of sketchy sites out there where they want you to pay for a membership to get access to the Path of Buildings. Don't do that. It's either going to be it's a scam, or it's a bad build, or both, right? In most cases it is, and if it doesn't have a Path of Building right in the video or in the description or somewhere easy for you to just copy and paste it and throw in a PoB and see what it looks like, do not play it. Just go with something else. It's either a scam or bad build or both, like I said. So the first thing we're going to go over is when you're looking at a build, how do you decide if it's a good build? Well, there's probably 5 things I would say every build needs nowadays, unless you want to die a million times and play a class cannon build, which you can do in Softcore. It's completely viable, but I don't like doing that, and I wouldn't recommend it to most people as it's not a very fun experience. Well, first thing I would say is you probably need around 30k armor. 30k armor, evasion helps too. Some people like to go evasion rather than armor. They only go evasion, and they go really light on armor. You can do this. I don't like playing builds like that because evasion is essentially things just don't hit you, right? Hits don't hit you, spell hits don't hit you, and attack hits don't hit you. It's not the same thing as dodge. You evade everything, right? But then every now and then you're gonna not evade something and it's gonna one-shot you because you don't have anything to mitigate the damage. So I prefer armor. You can go with evasion, but for this example I would say armor, you definitely want to have at least 30k armor. If you can get evasion as well, which we have some here, so our evade chance is at 30%, which is really good to have a combination of the two of them with little investment into evasion. Anyway, that's one of the minimums I would say you need for a build. You probably have about 30k, 20k armor, maybe if you're really early in the maps. Next thing is you want to have good damage. Now, we've just started getting the damage up here, but for this early gear, 700k is really good. You need to get your damage into the millions, essentially, on Path of Building with very little investment. If you're not at that point, it's going to be very hard for you to make the build do enough damage later in the game. For instance, I had someone send me a Path of Building the other night while I was streaming, and they were like, hey, what can I do with this brand build? He was doing a penance brand build, and granted, this guy was just, he was just messing around. He was just throwing a build together for fun. He told me that, right? But, he said, what do you think I could do to it? And he was level 92, had all the points allocated in the tree that he needed, had all his gems level 20, and he was at like 400k damage. And I said, I don't know. I'm looking at this, and there's sure we can do some things to this to make it better, but your damage is so low at such a end game point, right? You're level 92, you've allocated all the points you have to allocate. Your gems are as high levels they can get without a crazy investment in gear. These numbers are just too low to do anything with, right? Because when you're getting upgrades, and maybe you can get an upgrade, a big upgrade, you do 10% more damage, you do 20% more damage with a big upgrade, right? Well, if you're at 400k, that's only 40k more damage. It's only 80k more damage. To where if you're at a build that's going to scale well, you're at 1 to 2 million. And when you do 10% more damage when you're at 2 million, that's 200,000 more damage, right? And that's very important for allowing your damage to scale that well. So your build, in my opinion, needs to be at least a million, 2 million, 3 million, with very low gear investment. I'll show you in a minute how we take this build from 700,000 to the millions with low gear investment. And that's, in my opinion, what every good build should have. You shouldn't be sitting in the hundreds of thousands at level 90 something with decent gear, right? You need to be able to get into the millions so that when you do get those big upgrades, they're actually sizable, right? And you're getting hundreds of thousands more DPS when you get big upgrades rather than just 40,000 more DPS, because that's just not going to be enough to kill end game content, right? Yeah, we need max hits. So this used to be in the calculations tab. You used to only be able to look at it down here, but they've changed it, which is a very nice change in Path of Building. You can see all your max hits over here. Now, in my opinion, you need to be around at least 50k max hit for everything, right? And Chaos max hit, you can simply just get up by getting resistances. To increase your lightning, cold, and fire resistances above cap, that's how you're going to increase your elemental max hits. Fizz is going to be increased off of armor. So say if we get a lot more armor here, let's just put in additional 2,000 armor, right? 2,000 armor with the other stats we have, that gives us effectively 10,000 armor. Takes us from, what was it, about 50k up to 80k. So we're taking a much bigger hit. Now, I'm not going to get too in-depth in this, but this is also assuming the hits are small, right? So if I go into the configuration here, and I go into, where is it, the enemy physical damage, right? You can type in here how much assuming the enemy is hitting for you. Right now it's assuming a small hit. So let's say it's doing a big hit. It's doing 12,000 physical damage. Well, in that case, I can only take up to 30,000. And eventually, you're going to reach a point here where you're going to see what the biggest max hit you can hit is, right? If he has 20,000, that does 24,000 damage to me, which is getting very close to one-shotting me, right? So if we're up to 25,000, yeah, I don't have enough Fizz max hit to take that. I'm not exactly sure that's how it works, but that's a little bit of something you can play around with. I'm not a super expert in Path of Building, but that's kind of the gist of it. Okay, continuing on here, let's talk about regens and degens. This is the other thing you need to consider. For instance, you do not want a net regen that is negative, right? Mine is barely positive, right? But you want higher than that, right? So something that could fix this would be a vitality jump, right? If you run a vitality, my net regen is now 240. Why this is important is because dots in the game work kind of separately than max hits, right? So regen and degen is kind of separate from hits, right? So your max hit is not going to be affected by a degen or regen put on you. Now, if you get a cold degen put on you, like a cold dot, damage over time, right? It's going to use your elemental resistance, your cold resistance, in working against that dot. But if you get a fizz dot, such as bleed, put on you, it bypasses armor. So there is nothing mitigating that bleed damage, that physical bleed damage on you, right? Because it's going to bypass your armor and you can't reduce it. So the only thing that's going to reduce the amount of damage you're taking, say you get a 2,000 damage per second bleed put on you, if you don't have any regen, you're going to die in 2 seconds if you have 4,000 health. Right? And you have no net life regen to combat that, right? So if you have 1,000 regen, right, and you get a 2,000 damage per second dot put on you, it's going to only do 1,000 damage per second. So it's going to give you a lot more time. It's going to give you more tankiness against dots, right? So you do want to pay attention to net life regen. Like this build is at the very early stages. Blood Rage does damage over time to you. It's kind of like a drawback of using it. And if we don't have Vitality, I am barely in positive of net life regen. So if I get a dot put on me, it's basically going to do the full damage of the dot because I don't have any regen to counteract the degen. So that is something you want to pay attention to. Whether your life build, it's going to be life regen. If you're an energy shield build, it's going to be energy shield for regen. Going over the elemental max hits and max resistances, I would say this build right now with the passives on the tree, we've got 77, 78, 77 max res, up from 75, right? I would say you probably want around 80 minimum requirement for max elemental resistances if you're not mitigating the elemental damage you take in another way, right? So, and then obviously health pool, you want with defenses like this somewhere around 4,000 to 5,000 health pool. Energy shield, a little bit different story, but we're not going to go too in depth on energy shield. We're just going to assume life-based characters for now. And then the last thing actually is you want to start working towards having either spell block, regular block, or spell suppress, right? This build has 20% spell block. That's really just from using a judgment staff, chance to block spell damage, and then it has some spell suppress from the tree as I'm working towards taking spell suppression nodes because I'm in this area of the tree, which a lot of spell suppression nodes are in. So those are probably, I think, the 4 or 5 main things I would look for on a build in PoB. You need your damage to be able to scale. You need tankiness with armor and evasion. You need max hits to be high, including elemental hits, which means you need higher max resistances than just 75%. And you want to start working towards spell block, attack block, or spell suppression, in my opinion, for an extra defensive layer there. So those are the 4 or 5, I don't know how many I listed there, things that you need to look for when you're looking at a build and looking to pick a build for your league in Path of Building. If you don't have all those things, I think you're going to struggle a little bit with your build. Yeah. So, okay, let's get into scaling damage and PoB. Okay guys, so real quickly, let's just look at how to go about scaling up this damage, and let's talk about cost to value ratio real quick, because I see a lot of new players and they look at their build guides and they see these big upgrades they need to get, and you know, they spend their money kind of in the wrong places. So you want to use Path of Building to decide what the biggest upgrades you can get for the cheapest price are early on, right? Because you don't want to spend all the money you've saved up on some big upgrade that your build guide says you need, which you probably do need eventually, but it's not going to give you the most value for the cost, right? So that's what I kind of refer to as the cost value ratio there, right? So let's look at how we would scale up our build here, our example build, the Glacial Hammer attack build. Right, and again, this isn't a a build I'd recommend. This is just something I was playing around with for 319, and I haven't tested it, so I don't know how good it is, but on paper it looks okay. Anyway, so right now we're on a pretty low DPS two-hander staff, so if you're on attack build, and one of the ways you can scale up damage is with weapons, because your base attack damage is based upon your weapon damage, right? So we could look at scaling up the staff. Another big thing that for this build we could use, and what I'm probably going to do for this build, is use an Abyssus, right? And this is a really cheap upgrade, and you can see we get about 25, and maybe even more than that. It tells you here we're getting about 30 to 40% more damage for this if we put on an Abyssus. And this is a cheap unique. It's a very common unique. It could be kind of expensive early on, but you know, it's worth it. It's worth it. So it's not going to be more than maybe 20C, 20, 30C for a badly rolled one. We don't really care about the crit multi-roll. The crit multi-roll is nice on this one, but we more care about getting a low increased physical damage taken roll. But anyway, it's a nice upgrade we can get for really cheap there. So maybe just 10, 20C early on for any random Abyssus there to throw on to upgrade our damage. We could also look at getting a Blizzard Crown. It's going to help our damage a little bit, right? But it's not enough, right? And it's going to be more expensive than an Abyssus. So for now, we're just going to get this cheap, unique Abyssus, right? Okay, now let's look at weapon. Weapon is going to be another way we could scale our damage, right? I know, and this is a very common staff to use early on, it's pretty readily available, and we can get another 12% more DPS if we use a Hegemony's Era Judgment Staff here. So that'll be a nice cheap unique we can get. And look, we're already up to almost 1 million DPS from 600,000 with just these 2 little uniques upgrading us. Right? Okay, another thing I know we're going to need is a Taste of Hate. Right? It's going to help us with tankiness, but it's going to help our damage a little bit. But Taste of Hate is expensive early on. So I don't know if we can afford it. So what do we need? Well, let's look at our crit chance. Our crit chance is pretty low, and we're not using a flask for crit. So I did this ahead of time. We could probably use a diamond flask instead. And we're going to get a very similar increase in damage for just a diamond flask you can pick up off the ground. for much less cost than a Taste of Hate. So that's probably an upgrade we go with there for the time being until we can afford a Taste of Hate, or until we can more effectively farm to get a Taste of Hate. Now let's look at our defenses here. Our defenses are pretty low, especially our Fizmax hit, because we're using this Abysses. So what could we do here? Our armor is pretty low. Okay, so we want to look at upgrading our chest piece probably, or chest piece to get more armor, or just to get more armor nodes on the tree somewhere if we can. So what I'd probably do is I would eventually go with a brass dome in this build, which is giving us a lot more elemental max res, and it's going to give us a ton more armor to help our Fizz max hit and to help out our other max hits. So Fizz max hit is kind of low, but we've got the brass dome on, so we probably want more armor on the tree and things like that. So I do know we're going to want a cluster jewel like this eventually. Increased fizz damage, increased evasion rating, and armor. So the cluster jewel could be a pretty cheap option. This right here is an 8 passive, but we could get a 9, 10, 12 passive, and we're still pretty low level, right? 87, yeah, so we could allocate some to get this cluster jewel with at least this on it to get our Fizmax hit considerably higher there, right? With a lot more armor. We're now up to 45,000 with just this increased armor here, right? 40 to 45,000, a lot better. Looking a lot better there. Okay. So another thing we could do here, if we don't want to use an expensive brass dome early, we want a cheaper option, right? This is all about cost to value ratio here. Well, we aren't using endurance charges in this build, and endurance charges I know are going to give us way more physical damage mitigation, right? So how do we get endurance charges for cheap? Well, it's going to be way cheaper than using a brass dome earlier, and we can just keep our rare 6 link, and we could just get endurance charges with a cluster jewel, right? So let's go over here. Let's assume maybe we're using this big cluster jewel. I think that's okay right now. And let's add a small cluster jewel with a 2 passive. You might have to get a 3 passive with enduring composure, and this is going to allow us to get endurance charges and 30% increased armor. So kind of a win-win there with more armor, and we're getting endurance charges every 1 second if we've been hit. So then we're going max endurance charges. So look, then we're up to 90k Fizz max hit even using our Abysses, right? So that's a good upgrade we can do. Really good cost to value ratio instead of getting the brass dome, which we can get eventually. But for now, this is a really good upgrade, right? And you see once we get the brass dome, defenses are much better. But for now, if we can't afford the brass dome, we'll take that nice cost to value ratio upgrade there with that small cluster jewel. So we haven't used this interrogation yet. So I know the interrogation for this build is going to be a huge upgrade, right? It's going to be kind of expensive, so this would probably be the first big thing I would splurge on with a 2, 3, maybe up to 5x for an interrogation. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see how much it is on league start, but this brittle effect I know is going to take us up to almost double the damage here. So that's probably the first big thing I would splurge on to get our damage way up, right? In addition to maybe a brass dome, but I would probably wait on the brass dome because those are going to come down in price as the league goes on. So we'll wait on the brass dome and we'll just work on our damage for now, and then maybe we'll pick up an interrogation jewel to get our crit chance up really high, right? So now we've got a brittle effect on because we're using an interrogation jewel because we've acquired that, right? So we've increased our fizz damage quite a lot. Well, we could come up here, and we're going to be using a Ruthless support gem in our 6th link, I know. So we could come up here and grab also this. Ruthless hits Intimidate enemies, which you have to turn on the tree. So that's going to give us a little bit more damage as well as we level up. It's quite a considerable increase in our damage, another 200,000 there. So we've taken this build from 600,000 to 2.6 million, right? And this is the damage scaling I was talking about. This build is able to scale damage into the millions with low investment. We're probably only, probably less than 5x, with the interrogation being the vast majority of that on this build, right? Interrogation probably cost us anywhere from 3-4x early in the league, where these are just 20C uniques maybe early on, right? That we've added into the build. We got a diamond flask into the Taste of Hate. Eventually, we're going to want to get the Taste of Hate. It's going to make us a lot tankier. It's going to give us more damage as well. That's going to be like maybe an up to an X at league start. That's a little upgrade we can get, but not that important. We can get similar results for much cheaper with a diamond flask there, with our cost to value ratio being as efficient as possible with our upgrades, right? And then eventually we could probably go with cluster jewels, right? Maybe we take this out. Intimidate is really nice to have, but maybe we get a better cluster jewel and we get more points allocated into our cluster jewel. We could save these points, right? And we could use interrogation in this cluster jewel instead then we're up to 3 million damage. We get a node like this, we're up to 3.1 million damage. And I could keep going, guys, but you could see how this build is able to keep tankiness relatively good and scale its damage well for pretty cheap. And that's what you're looking for with your gear. Even if you aren't playing a super efficient League starter build, you want to make sure the upgrades you're getting you're getting a lot of value for as little cost as possible with each early upgrade you decide on, because that's going to allow you to do harder content, it's going to allow you to get money faster, and it's going to allow you to have a better experience with the game. And then when you're building a really good place where it's farming content really efficiently, you're making a lot more money, then you could think about spending more money on those more expensive upgrades later on, right? But make sure you know your build, you know the upgrades that are going to give you the most value for the least cost early on. Alright guys, well that's going to do it for this one. Kind of a long video, so thanks for hanging in there if you're still with us here. And we're probably going to do about 5 videos in this little League Start series, so we'll have some more advanced stuff coming up. We'll get into some really cool stuff pretty soon. So yeah, look forward to that, and thanks for watching.